and gentlemen, welcome to beautiful Orlando, Florida, the home of TNA Wrestling's Impact Zone. Ladies and gentlemen,
let the party begin. I've got snacks.
He is the Professor, Mike Today.
The year is 2005. The San Antonio Spurs, led by Tim Duncan, defeat the defending champions, the Detroit Pistons, in a grueling 7-game series in the NBA Finals en route to the championship. We Belong Together by Mariah Carey tops the Billboard year-end Hot 100 in the United States, and the last film of the Star Wars prequel, Revenge of the Sith, releases in theaters. What do these things have to do with this video? Absolutely nothing. However, 2005 so happens to be the year Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, also known as Impact Wrestling nowadays, seemed to be picking up ahead of steam. TNA would hold its Unbreakable pay-per-view, which saw AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, and Samoa Joe duke it out in an outstanding 3-way match, which received a 5-star rating from polarizing wrestling critic Dave Meltzer, the only 5-star match in the company's history even to this day. TNA would strike a deal with Spike TV to air their weekly flagship show, TNA Impact, with the first episode airing in October of 2005. Marvel Toys would also strangely team up with TNA to license their action figures. Even stranger, in 2005, TNA found themselves in negotiations to release a video game based on their product. According to IGN, TNA was being looked at by Electronic Arts and Rockstar Games before ultimately partnering with Midway Games, known mostly for the Mortal Kombat series. But yes, you heard that right. Rockstar Games was linked to yet another wrestling game IP after backing out of talks with ECW years prior before their own demise in 2001. And anyway, after 3 years in September 2008, TNA Impact was released for the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and Nintendo Wii. For this video, we're going to be mainly looking at the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 versions. How does this game stack up in 2023? Does it even have a lasting impact? Let's find out.
Rated T14.
A TNA game? You want some of this?
Bring it. All the moves, all the wrestlers, all the action that only TNA Impact can provide.
We'll take it. Yeah.
TNA Impact, as seen on Spike. Wrestling so real, you feel pain.
First, let's talk about the development process. The game was developed by Midway Studios Los Angeles. TNA originals Samoa Joe and AJ Styles, self-proclaimed hardcore gamers, were brought into staff meetings with the Midway development team and asked for their input in order to brainstorm ideas for the gameplay. Along with Joe and Styles, fellow wrestlers Christopher Daniels, Sanjay Dutt, Jeff Jarrett, and the talented, albeit unanimously known for being an asshole, Low-Key, were all involved in the motion capture process. During television tapings in October of 2006, TNA wrestlers were scanned for the game. Crowd noises, as well as other audio from the Impact Zone in Universal Studios, were too recorded. Also, the London arena in the game was inspired by and based on the Liverpool Olympia, a venue built in Liverpool, England in 1905 for the purpose of circus and theater. Very fitting for professional wrestling. The intro before entering the menu begins with the narrator prefacing the game with TNA footage playing in the background and then transitioning to in-game footage. Barry Scott is the narrator's name, and if you were a TNA fan during this time, you would instantly recognize his voice as he was synonymous with voiceover work for the company. The intro does a decent job building hype for what players are about to get into. After the intro is over, you're set to navigate through the menu, which is pretty clean and straightforward. One thing you might notice is a lack of game modes and match types. You're subjected to a very limited set of match types. Your standard one-on-one, submission, multi-man matches, and Ultimate X. No King of the Mountain, Feast or Fired, Monsters Ball, Full Metal Mayhem, or even a standard cage match, which was known as Six Sides of Steel in TNA. It's pretty disappointing knowing that TNA had a bunch of exclusive gimmick match types that were excluded from the game, especially since that would have been a good way to stand out and put their own mark in the wrestling video game market. However, as previously mentioned, Ultimate X is in the game, and it is hands down the most fun match type. Pulling off high-risk maneuvers and feeling the impact as wrestlers plummet off the cables are some of the most fun you'll have in this game. It's pretty well done for their first iteration. In the story mode, you play as Suicide, who is voiced by previously mentioned asshole Low-Ki. Unlike Low-Ki, however, Suicide gets kicked out and blacklisted from a wrestling promotion for slightly different reasons. Without spoiling too much, the intro sees Suicide rising rapidly through the ranks of TNA, demolishing everything and everybody in his path, which leads to a World Championship match against Double J Jeff Jarrett. Before the match, however, Suicide is approached by LAX, who are apparently Jarrett's lackeys for some reason. Anyways, they tell Suicide to quote-unquote take a dive and lose the title match on purpose, but Suicide pretty much tells them, "That doesn't work for me, brother," and wins the title anyway. This angers LAX, and they promptly proceed to beat Suicide within an inch of his life backstage. Next thing you know, Suicide awakes from his unfortunate slumber in a hospital in Tijuana, Mexico, not remembering anything about his past or even his name. From there, you create your own custom wrestler, which is very limited, unfortunately, but you end up having to wrestle through the indies until you wind up back in TNA, eventually remembering how everything started in the first place. I'm not sure if this is a bit of an unpopular opinion, but I actually enjoyed the story mode in this game. I played it through a few times over the years since it was released, and I had some fun within it. My only gripe with it is really the amount of created wrestlers you have to face in the game mode. I'm also more of a fan of creative freedom within my career modes, like in Here Comes the Pain and Shut Your Mouth, but for a linear story, it's told pretty well, and with how extremely limited the match selections are, they do a relatively good job keeping you engaged. Playing through the story mode will unlock some wrestlers. You can also unlock more wrestlers by accumulating points that you earn after each match you play. Once you reach a certain amount of points, you unlock that wrestler. For example, 250,000 points will unlock the late great Don West. But Don West's broadcast partner, Mike TNA, also appears in the game as DLC if you were lucky enough to purchase him before the DLC got removed from the store. Also available as DLC at one point were P.D. Williams and Curryman. The downside was that the DLC was exclusive to the Xbox 360. I think it's a good time to quickly mention the PSP port of this game titled TNA iMPACT Cross the Line. This version was ported very well, and even includes hardcore legend Mick Foley and Consequences Creed, now known today as Austin Creed of Up Up Down Down fame, or famously Xavier Woods from The New Day. I don't have much to say of the DS version as I haven't played it, but I am aware of the wacky storylines in that version. But to backtrack to the roster, I must say this is one hell of an impressive roster. You have the bigger established names in the business at the time like Kurt Angle, Sting, Booker T, Christian Cage, Kevin Nash, Team 3D, Rhino, Jeff Jarrett, and Scott Steiner, but you also have an incredible choice of homegrown talent who eventually carve out an outstanding legacy for themselves like AJ Styles, Samoa Joe, Christopher Daniels, the Motor City Machine Guns, Jay Lethal, LAX, Beer Money's James Storm and Robert Roode, and Abyss. A very low-key stacked roster. In terms of venues and arenas, there's a decent selection to choose from, including the classic Impact Zone, Japan, Mexico, Vegas, England, Freedom Center, and an Armory. The amazing graphics really add to the atmosphere in these arenas to really make them stand out from each other visually. They all operate and interact the same, but all are aesthetically pleasing in their own way. The best way I can describe the gameplay aspects of TNA iMPACT is lost potential. The graphics by 2023 standard still hold up pretty well, but at the time they were an impressive anomaly, rivaling WWE's video game graphics and even edging them out in that department for years to come if you ask most people. Midway San Diego also did a great job with the core gameplay mechanics for the most part. The pace is fast, snappy, and fluid to replicate the product on television. Reversals are a bit tricky but feel rewarding if you can time them properly. It's also satisfying creating reversal sequences when going back and forth with the opponent, chaining reversals together. Although you're bound to run into some minor collision detection issues, animations are crisp and the overall feel and impact of punches and grapples to go along with the sharp sound is really well done. You can also interrupt most moves mid-execution, much akin to the astonishing Day of Reckoning games on the GameCube. However, the more hours you sink in and really examine deeper under the hood, you realize how shallow the game and its content are. Other than the aforementioned lack of match types, the pathetic selection of weapons is laughable, and I use the word selection in the loosest way possible. There are literally only steel chairs, no ladders, tables, ring bells, or even kendo sticks, and the most interaction you can have with the steel steps is tripping over them.
Turn out the lights!
I will say though, the chair shots are absolutely brutal in this game, one of my favorites in any wrestling game. There's also a lack of variety in movesets. Although animated really well, there aren't enough moves in the game to set each character apart. You'll find yourself doing a handful of the same moves with different wrestlers, which is pretty disappointing considering the diverse talent and the characters available to choose from. There isn't even an option to hold title matches in Exhibition either, whereas the WWE games at this point had implemented that feature and made it a staple of Exhibition mode. It would have added at least some replayability factor to this game, which is the biggest problem for me personally. Once you're done with the story mode, that's really it. From there, you're just playing exhibition matches with no incentive besides accumulating points in order to unlock new moves for your limited custom character, as well as unlocking wrestlers like
Who is it? What? I should kick your fucking ass. Who is this?
The least they could have done was add some legends as unlockables. I mean, how cool would it be to be able to unlock Ken Shamrock or Raven instead of Big Bad Benny? I guess it could come down to money and licensing, but I'm willing to bet that playing the game to unlock fictional characters is not going to entice most players to stick around. There's also some extra features in the menu that go a bit into detail of the development process of the game, and also a few exclusive matches to watch. TNA Impact would never see a proper sequel, which is quite a shame. As bare bones of an experience it was, there was definitely something cooking there with this game. Another year or two of development for a proper sequel would have done wonders. However, shortly after release, Midway Studios Los Angeles merged with Midway San Diego. Not even a year later, in August 2009, however, Midway practically ceased to exist and filed for bankruptcy, with most of the studio's assets being bought by WWE Games publisher at the time, THQ. In 2010, with a chunk of the former Midway Studio staff being employed at THQ San Diego, work began on the cult classic spiritual successor to TNA Impact, WWE All-Stars. Nowadays, the TNA Impact video game legacy is mostly remembered to an extent as the blueprint to the arcade-like WWE title. With all of that being said, is TNA Impact the video game an underrated title? Maybe I'm alone on this, but my opinion is yes, which would somewhat make TNA Impact one of my guilty pleasures, I guess. Voice your opinions in the comments section if you agree or disagree, and let me know what some of your underrated wrestling video game titles are.